Okay, what we've got here is we've got a reading on the air fuel at 2% throttle. Like I said, you push on the brake, roll the throttle to 2%, let go of the brake and record. And this time it went up to about 3,000 RPM, as high as it would go at 2% in fifth gear. And so what you see here, using the software, you can just follow along the RPM scale here. Everything looks really good. Everything's right at 13 to 1 until it gets to about 2,800 RPM, 2,750. It starts getting a little lean. It starts getting 13.8, moving up towards 14. So what I would do is I would go over here to the 2% column, and I would go up to about 2,750, and I would start adding a little bit of fuel. I might put a 2 in there or 3 in there, and just do that for maybe a couple thousand RPM above the 25 or 2,700 RPM. So I might go from 2,700 to say 35 or 4,000 by giving it 2 or 3 numbers, 2 or 3% more fuel. Now if I go to the 5%, clear this off the screen. Now there's the 5% throttle position. You can see more throttle, more RPM. This test went up to almost 5,500 RPM. But there's a couple things along the way here to look at. Right at the beginning of the test, it's 14, 13.8, 13.9, which isn't too bad. When you get right at 3,000, it's 14.6. That's a little lean. I'd like to see that around 13.5, 13 for drivability. So I would go over to my power commander in the 5% column, go down to 3,000 RPM, and I would look and see what the numbers are. And I might start giving that a little more fuel in that column as well. At probably 28.75 is where I would start. I would give it a couple numbers. By 3,000, I'd give it 5 numbers, 5%. And I would just stay with that 5% all the way across, because that's pretty much leveled out there, and it's just a little bit lean. So I could go 4 or 5 numbers above 2,800 RPM, 4 or 5% more fuel all the way down through that column. Okay, and this is how simple this is. You just make those changes. In this case, you could go all the way up to 6,000 because the test went to 55 and it was kind of hanging along the same line. It was a little bit lean and kind of staying there. So you'd be safe to probably go up to 6,000 or 7,000 using those same numbers that you're adding as far as fuel. The next test would be 10%, 20%, and 40%. Hold the brake, turn the throttle, get it where you want it, release the brake, push the button to record. Okay, that's the procedure that you have to work on. It takes a little practice, but it's not too hard. If you can get this down, and you can run through all these throttle positions before you get to the wide open throttle testing for maximum horsepower, just doing the drivability, this will save you $15,000 in the cost of a dyno. This allows you to tune these motorcycles without some sort of expensive eddy current machine. And I'm telling you, if you do this correctly and you get good at this, the customer cannot tell the difference. Very few customers will even have a clue of the difference if you make a map on an eddy current machine or you make a map doing this way when it comes to drivability below 50% throttle. So once you're able to get this down, you can do this in a half hour or so, let the engine cool down a little bit. I mean, you can make some good money in an hour tuning for drivability. One other thing, if I was doing a carbureted motorcycle, this first line that I looked at might have been 25% throttle position. You can mark it anywhere you want, 20, 40, 60, you can mark it 25, 50, wherever you want to check it at, you can mark it at, as long as you do it the same every time and you hold the brake, use the braking technique to do this. But this could be the 25% throttle position on a carbureted motorcycle, and you could say, okay, that's a little on the lean side. I probably want to raise the needle one notch on the clip. Okay, so there's a way to do that too. And if this was a 2% or say 5 or 10%, if you just marked it and you did a 5 or 10%, you could say, okay, this is what the pilot is letting me see here. The pilot jet is making me a little bit too lean. I need a little bigger pilot jet. And pilot jets, if you move them one size, if you go rich one size, that's a pretty good change. So you might want to take baby steps when it comes to pilot jets. Main jets are a little different. You're moving a lot more air, and so the ratio of fuel is a whole lot different than when you just barely got the throttle off of the closed position. Okay, one more thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a 10 and a 20% throttle position test. That way you can see 2 more times how this test works. Like I said, you turn the throttle while you're holding the brake, you get the throttle position you want. It just takes 2 seconds. You get the throttle position you want, you hit the button to start the test and let go of the brake. And just let the engine accelerate. And I'll take it up to about half of maximum RPM because there's not much need to go above that when you're just working at, you know, small throttle positions like this. So I'll go ahead and do 2 more and you can see how that looks. See if that'll help you any. Okay, pretty easy. I've got throttle positions that I can look at now, air fuel mixtures in each 4 throttle positions, 2%, 5%, 10%, 20%. I could do 40%, I could do 60%. When you start getting into 40 and 60%, you might want to bring the RPMs up just a little bit more and then roll into it quickly before you start the test. That way you don't want to lug the motor too much or the engine too much, but you can do that no problem. Most of these motorcycles will handle it. When you start working with these fuel injection controllers, you want to make sure that the throttle position is set correctly at 0 and 100%. You want to make sure that the trim is set in a neutral position. Not one cylinder is richer or leaner than the other. And you want to make sure that nobody has messed with the buttons. Make sure all the buttons on the power commander are in the neutral position, in the center position. You want to check all these things before you start any of this tuning. And that way you know every time they unplug the battery and then plug it back up, it'll be the same, it won't change. Well, I'm Mike. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a few things. I'll be doing another video on wide open throttle here in the next week or so. So stay tuned and thanks a lot.